I'm Clara Hunt, 51 years old, and I've lived inside this Alpha Beta Omega galactic society for exactly 46 years, ever since my consciousness locked into a newborn abandoned infant's body after my previous life ended abruptly. I don't broadcast my age, my wealth, or my professional standing. Low profile has always been my survival tactic, one I refined through decades of being overlooked, written off, and underestimated by every blood relative I have. Right now, I'm perched on a custom leather office sofa, a legally binding galactic mate contract spread flat across the glass table between me and Elias Voss. He's the youngest Supreme Fleet Commander in Imperial history, pure elite alpha, heir to the Voss multi-trillion interstellar conglomerate, and the man the entire galaxy's Omega population obsesses over. Our match score from the Central Galactic Mating Database hit 100%, an unprecedented statistical anomaly, a result no sociologist or biochemist thought possible for a beta like me paired with a top-tier alpha. Elias stares at me without blinking, his jaw set tight, every line of his frame radiating restrained dominance. The pressure rolling off his unregulated alpha pheromones makes my temples throb, even though betas don't carry scent glands or secondary sexual markers to process those signals. I exhale slow, pick up the digital stylus, and sign my legal name across the bottom line of the contract without a single argument. I didn't ask for this forced temporary bond, valid for 1 solar year before permanent marriage paperwork becomes an option, but galactic law overrides personal preference when a perfect 100% compatibility flag triggers. The database was built to boost interstellar birth rates, programmed to prioritize genetic and psychological alignment above individual autonomy, and I still can't wrap my head around how my profile even got unlocked from matching in the first place. I never submitted a request, never toggled the mating profile switch on my galactic ID. That's the first loose thread I plan to unravel later, once I got a minute alone with my personal legal team. The second shock of this entire situation is the biological mismatch between Elias and me. For over a century, recorded galactic matching history only held one single alpha-beta pairing, a dusty case file buried in the Federal Archives. Alphas almost exclusively pair with omegas. Betas settle with other betas. Societal hierarchy drilled that narrative into every child's education from primary school onward. News of our perfect match leaked to the public within 12 hours of the database alert firing, and every media channel, elite social circle, and military division lost their collective minds. Every Omega woman who spent years campaigning for Elias's attention sent furious, encrypted messages to my comms, filled with resentment and disbelief. My blood family, the Hunts, hit me with nonstop calls, all of them layered with thinly veiled disdain, and I knew exactly what their internal commentary sounded like. A useless, plain beta stepping into a position meant for a pure-blooded Omega heiress who could bolster the Voss family's political and corporate power. Elias folds the signed contract, tucks it into a waterproof military-grade data folder, and doesn't leave a copy for me. I tilt my head, confused, ready to ask for my legal duplicate, but his wrist comm buzzes sharp, a high-priority military alert cutting through the quiet room. He reads the incoming transmission, his brow furrowing deep, the cold detachment in his expression sharpening further. We'll discuss the terms of our cohabitation later. He states flat, no warmth, no softness. The gentle boy I remembered from our childhood completely erased beneath decades of military conditioning. He stands, locks the suite's front door behind him on his way out, leaving me trapped inside his high-rise residential wing with no way to exit without overriding his security codes. I sink back into the sofa, my mind drifting back 40 years, to the day my adoptive parents brought me home from the galactic orphanage at age 5. Back then, I'd mastered a bright, easygoing persona to make them pick me over the other quiet, withdrawn infants waiting for placement. The Hunts had 2 biological alpha sons already, 10 and 12 years older than me, and they'd only applied to adopt a daughter for superficial companionship, never expecting me to amount to anything substantial. Every formal corporate gala my father dragged me to back then included mandatory visits to the Voss estate, where I first crossed paths with Elias when we were both small children. I'd wandered off from my father's business conversations into the sprawling Voss botanical gardens, lost amid rows of flowering star jasmine that bloomed pale white, mimicking snowdrifts under the evening sunset. I spotted a lone figure perched on a metal swing set tucked between rose bushes and interstellar peonies, his small hands twisting a white galactic tulip stem between his fingers. Even as a kid, his bone structure and facial symmetry stood out, and I've always been a lifelong sucker for striking faces, so I wandered over to strike up a conversation. "Hey, you lost out here too?" I'd smiled, toning down my natural sharpness to project childlike innocence, expecting him to brush me off or ignore me entirely. He lifted his head, a soft, polite smile tugging at his lips. Nothing like the harsh, unyielding commander I'd just sat across from an hour ago. "You wandered away from your guardians, didn't you? Follow me. I'll lead you back to the main terrace." He held out the tulip for me to grasp the end of, using the flower as a makeshift link to guide me through the winding garden paths once dusk fell and the outdoor lights hadn't flickered on yet. That day, I learned his full name, Elias Julian Voss, and I made it my personal mission to show up at his estate every single afternoon after that, pestering him with endless questions about his family, his studies, the massive gardens, anything to hold his attention. He'd always answered every single one of my ramblings patiently, never growing annoyed or brushing me off. "I remember your name, Clara," he'd say every time I reintroduced myself, even after weeks of my constant visits. But I could feel an invisible wall between us, even back then. The Voss family's patriarch, Elias's father, ran the household with brutal, uncompromising discipline. Elias carried a punishing workload of advanced military and corporate coursework starting at age 8, and any minor misstep led to harsh physical reprimands or mandatory extra training shifts at the fleet base. I'd catch him covered in fresh bruising or lacerations dozens of times, forcing a calm, pleasant mask on for guests and family, hiding every trace of his pain so no one would perceive him as weak. The day he finally let his guard down completely happened during a brutal winter solar cycle, when ice storms blanketed the entire planet. My adoptive father banned me from visiting the Voss property, fearing the freezing temperatures would make me sick, so I found a narrow utility crawl space along the garden perimeter, a small opening under the metal fencing I could slip through undetected. Snow piled knee-deep across the lawn, and I spotted Elias kneeling bare-chested on the frozen stone patio, his back crisscrossed with fresh, bleeding whip marks left by his father's disciplinary rod. His shoulders dusted thick with snow, his muscles rigid, spine ramrod straight like a steel beam, refusing to slouch or show any hint of agony even when the wind bit into his open wounds. My cloak was caked with mud from crawling through the underbrush, my fingers numb, cheeks burning red from the sub-zero wind. I stepped quietly across the snow until I stood directly behind him, and he didn't register my presence until I whispered his name. He snapped his head upward, shock flooding his eyes first, then cold, sharp wariness hardening his features. The staff didn't alert me you'd arrived. How did you get past the main gates? His voice was sharp, distant, an order more than a question. Leave now. I didn't move an inch. I brushed the snow off his frozen shoulders, pulled the thermal heat pack from my pocket, and pressed at his chest, then slipped my heavy cloak over his bare shoulders to trap warmth against his lacerated skin. He tried to push the fabric away, flinching when the cloth brushed his open back wounds, his face draining pale as ash. I gripped both his wrists to stop him from resisting, my tone flat and unyielding, no trace of the playful kid he was used to seeing. Take it, don't fight me. I cupped his icy cheek in my palm, and the combination of blood loss, freezing temperatures, and unprocessed pain overwhelmed him. His eyes rolled back, and he slumped forward into my hold, unconscious. I sent an encrypted message to my father, asking him to arrange a private meeting with Elias's father to stall the household staff long enough for me to summon the Voss family physician. While the doctor stitched his lacerations and administered pain suppressants, I spoke with the head household manager, Mr. Hale, who had served the Voss family for 30 years and held genuine affection for Elias, one of the few people who ever saw past the heir's stoic public persona. Elias rescued a stray feral space cat from the training base last year, Hale explained, his voice heavy with sorrow. A senior fleet officer used the kitten as live target practice during weapons drills, and Elias attacked the man in retaliation, nearly killing him. The base code mandates absolute obedience to ranking officers, so his father deemed this the lightest possible punishment to avoid dishonorable discharge from the fleet track. He's racked up dozens of critical combat victories, but one moment of defending a defenseless animal erased all his merit in the patriarch's eyes. When Elias woke that night, I sat beside his hospital bed, talking nonstop to pull him out of his silent, empty headspace. I told him he hadn't done anything wrong, that his compassion didn't make him weak, that one day he'd outrank every officer who'd ever underestimated him. He stared blankly at the frost-fogged window, snow swirling outside, and for the first time, I spotted raw, unmasked vulnerability in his expression. I lifted his cold hand, pressed it against my cheek, and spoke the promise I'd carried in my heart for years. I hate seeing you hurt. I've always felt fragile, so you've got to be the one to protect me. I'm not going anywhere. I'll stay by your side forever. He stared at me for a long stretch of quiet, his voice barely audible, thick with quiet disbelief. Forever with me? I nodded firmly, and that invisible barrier between us cracked wide open after that afternoon. Our bond deepened, slow and steady, tiny pieces of trust stacking up between us, with every secret we shared, every quiet moment we stole away from the pressures of our separate family lives. We split off to attend separate interstellar universities once our adolescent differentiation cycle hit. I stabilized as a beta, a result that crushed my adoptive parents' quiet expectations. They'd watched my academic test scores, my physical coordination, my sharp tactical problem-solving skills growing up, fully convinced I'd differentiate as a high-ranking alpha, or at minimum a rare, coveted omega with strong genetic markers. A plain, unremarkable beta ranked dead last on their list of desired outcomes for their adopted daughter. My two older alpha brothers never interacted with me beyond sending automatic monthly credit transfers to my galactic account. We had zero emotional connection, no shared hobbies, no meaningful conversations. I never cared much about blood family ties anyway. My previous life taught me that biological relation didn't equal loyalty or care. Elias differentiated as a dominant prime alpha, his genetic ranking among the top 5% of all alphas across the empire, and his schedule became impossible to navigate. Military training, corporate board meetings, strategic policy briefings consumed every hour of his days, and I found every spare minute I had to seek him out, just to sit beside him while he studied fleet battle plans, walk along the planetary shorelines with him on rare days off, or simply rest my head on his shoulder while he decompressed from weeks of nonstop labor. I'd never viewed him like an older brother. From childhood onward, every soft spot I held in my heart belonged solely to him, the first person I'd ever loved without reservation across 2 full lifetimes. Betas don't produce unique identifying pheromones, so any alpha or omega I interact with leaves their scent clinging to my skin, a detail I never fully understood until a random female alpha student tracked me down outside my university lecture hall one afternoon, clutching a bouquet of crimson star roses and a handwritten confession letter. She rambled about loving me for 2 full academic cycles, tears welling in her eyes, stating she didn't care I was a beta with no scent glands or mating markers. I turned her down gently, explaining I already held romantic feelings for someone else, and she begged for a brief hug to say goodbye. I agreed, unaware how heavily foreign alpha pheromones would register to Elias's sensitive prime alpha sensory receptors. She clung to me, crying into my uniform shirt for nearly 40 minutes, soaking the fabric with her tears and her distinct scent, then left the roses behind as a parting gift before walking away. By the time I rushed to the Fleet Lounge where Elias waited for me, I'd missed 5 urgent comms messages he'd sent an hour prior, all marking the onset of his cyclical alpha susceptible period, a phase where his pheromone regulation spirals out of control without a compatible partner's biological comm. His last message, sent 30 minutes before I arrived, read short and raw. I'm in so much pain, Clara. My chest ached the second I read those words, and I sprinted down the military corridor to the secured private lounge, knocking hard on the locked door. To my surprise, the handle twisted open unlatched when I pushed it, and I stepped inside, setting the forgotten star roses down on the metal side table beside the entryway. Elias huddled in the far corner of the small room, his tall frame curled inward against the wall, long lashes casting dark shadows over his cheeks. The pheromone detection unit mounted on the wall blared a constant warning alert, its digital readout spiking far past the safe threshold for unregulated prime alpha hormones. He didn't acknowledge my arrival at first, lost in the fog of his susceptible episode, and I settled beside him on the cold floor, silent, letting my presence ground him without pushing conversation. I broke the quiet after several minutes, curious about the experience he endured every cycle. What does this susceptible period feel like for you? He lifted his head, his gaze locking onto mine, dark and smoldering, layers of suppressed longing and fear buried beneath the surface of his irises. You don't carry pheromones, no scent gland to stabilize me. Do you even understand what it means to crave someone this badly? My throat tightened. I understood every single part of it, but I couldn't bring myself to admit it aloud, too wrapped up in my own fears of our irreconcilable biological divide. Galactic society drilled into everyone that alphas biologically gravitate toward omegas, their complementary sense designed to soothe susceptible episodes, create permanent bonded markers, solidify lifelong partnerships. As a beta, I couldn't leave a lasting imprint on his biology, and he couldn't anchor me with his pheromones either. I spent years terrified that his innate alpha instincts would override our emotional bond, that one day an omega's natural biological pull would draw him away from me for good. Elias's composure snapped completely when he caught the foreign alpha scent clinging to my uniform, the floral perfume from the roses mixing with the stranger's pheromones to overwhelm his already overstimulated senses. He seized my wrists, his grip tight enough to bruise, jaw clenched with restrained rage and heartbreak. Where were you an hour ago? The second you stepped through that door, I could smell another alpha all over your skin. Someone held you close, didn't they? He glanced at the red roses on the table, his tone dripping with quiet agony. You accepted their flowers, let them touch you, let their scent sink into your clothes while I sat here suffering alone. I rushed to explain the female classmate's confession, the long hug, the unwanted bouquet, but every word only seemed to deepen his distress. He stripped my scented uniform jacket off my shoulders, carried the roses outside the lounge, locked the door shut behind him, then pulled me flush against his torso, his hands trembling as he pressed his teeth to the hollow of my neck, searching for a scent gland I didn't possess. I fumbled a high-grade synthetic suppressant from my pocket, ready to administer it into his neck gland, but he trapped my wrist mid-movement, shaking his head slowly. Suppressants don't work anymore for me. Clara, the MY systems built up a full resistance after years of force shots to get through training deployments. His voice dropped to a broken, pleading murmur, his forehead resting against mine, his warm breath brushing my lips. Just kiss me. That's all I need right now. I leaned into him, and the kiss turned bruising, his teeth breaking the skin of my lower lip until metallic blood filled our mouths. The next morning, every student and faculty member on campus whispered about us, our unspoken relationship exposed to the entire university population. Elias's mood lifted drastically after that day, stealing small kisses between classes, checking in with me hourly to confirm I still cared for him, repeating the question, "Do you love me?" over and over until I'd soften and lean into his touch. I clung to every quiet moment of affection he gave me, too cowardly to voice my own feelings openly, too paralyzed by the societal divide between alpha and beta to commit fully to him. That lingering fear of inevitable separation only grew stronger after a campus storytelling night, where a classmate shared a widely circulated old galactic legend about an alpha-beta couple. The story ended with the alpha cheating on his beta partner with an omega during a susceptible period, the relationship collapsing entirely, framed as an unavoidable biological outcome for cross-dire pairings. Every word of that tale burrowed into my brain, reinforcing every insecurity I'd ever carried about our dynamic. As Elias aged, his susceptible episodes intensified, the synthetic suppressants growing less effective each cycle. Kisses and gentle physical contact barely dulled the hormonal overload anymore. He'd dig his fingernails into his own arms hard enough to draw blood during his worst episodes, all to avoid lashing out and hurting me by accident. Multiple members of the Voss family pulled me aside for private conversations, lecturing me that I couldn't fulfill his biological needs, that a pure-blooded Omega Heiress would be the only logical match for a man slated to become Supreme Fleet Commander. They pointed out my lack of political family influence, my status as a mere beta with no elite bloodline, arguing I'd hold him back from winning the Galactic Commander general election, a title Elias had dreamed of earning since he was 16 years old, a secret he'd only shared with me alone under the stars one night years prior. All their arguments held undeniable weight, and I couldn't counter a single one. That summer break, after my 4th university year, I booked a transport shuttle to the border military planet where Elias was stationed, fully intending to end our relationship for good, to remove the barrier I'd become between him and his lifelong ambition. I watched him deliver a strategic defense briefing to the Fleet Council through the conference room window, every word sharp, authoritative, commanding the room's full attention, glowing with the power he'd spent his entire life chasing. When he spotted me lingering outside, his face lit up with unbridled joy, every trace of his cold commander persona melting away in an instant. Back in his private fleet quarters, he ordered my favorite Black Forest star cake from the planet's top restaurant, chattering nonstop about his future plans, a secluded luxury villa he'd purchased on Y, 2-star, the planet famous for bioluminescent ocean tides and panoramic stargazing views. He promised to step back from his military duties for months at a time to travel the galaxy with me, even joking he'd resign his commander candidacy entirely if that's what I wanted. I stared at the cake frosting, my throat tight with suppressed tears, knowing resigning would mean sacrificing everything he'd worked toward for decades. The general election would kick off 2 months after our planned vacation window, and missing campaign events would tank his public approval ratings, leaving him vulnerable to harsh punishment from his father for abandoning the family legacy. The majority of galactic voters already voiced public disapproval of his association with a beta partner, stating they refused to cast ballots for a commander bonded to someone who couldn't provide biological or political support. Every media poll, every elite social conversation, every Voss family lecture echoed the same verdict. I was holding him back. I lifted my head to meet his eyes, the question heavy on my tongue. If an Omega's natural scent is the only reliable way to calm an Alpha's susceptible period, does that biological pull override every emotional bond? Elias hesitated, his expression sobering. Fleet criminal archives show nearly all unregulated Alpha assaults occur during susceptible cycles, triggered by unfiltered Omega pheromones. Instinct doesn't always listen to rational thought. That single admission shattered every fragile hope I'd clung to. I crossed the room, grabbed his jaw, and kissed him hard, pouring every ounce of unspoken love and grief into the contact, my hands fisting in the fabric of his uniform shirt. He recovered fast, pulling me against his body, his kiss tender despite the raw desperation underneath it, his pheromones wrapping around me like a blanket to mark me as his own, a temporary biological anchor that only lasted a few hours at most. I pulled away mid-embrace, tears spilling down my cheeks, and jammed a custom-formulated hormonal stabilizer I'd engineered myself straight into his neck gland. I'd spent months refining the compound in my personal lab, zero adverse side effects, tested repeatedly on my own beta physiology to guarantee safety, designed to paralyze his motor functions for 6 full hours. I'm a certified interstellar biochemist, remember? This stabilizer is my original formula, no long-term damage to your hormone levels, I whispered, wiping wet streaks off my cheeks as I stepped back from the bed, my legs shaky from the intimacy we'd just shared. I can't keep trapping you between your dreams and me. I love you, but I can't stand watching you suffer through every susceptible cycle, can't bear the constant fear that one day your alpha instincts will pull you toward an omega to ease the pain. The public hates our pairing, your family resents me, your entire career hangs in the balance because of a beta who can't bond you permanently. His face drained of all color, every warm emotion vanishing, leaving only hollow devastation in his eyes, silently begging me to take back every word I'd just said. I'm transferring to the farthest research planet in the Empire, T7-star, home to the top biochemistry doctoral program in the galaxy. I'm shutting off my galactic comms, cutting all tracking links to my identity. Don't send anyone to hunt me down. If you care about me at all, let me leave to build my career without weighing you down. We both need space to figure out if this cross-dire bond is worth sacrificing everything for. I paused, a bitter, quiet warning falling from my lips. If you dispatch fleet scouts to track my location, I'll vanish to the unregulated outer star systems where no imperial authority can reach me. I leaned back down to press one last soft kiss to his unmoving lips before turning to walk out the door, my chest splitting open with every step I took away from him. Within 30 minutes of exiting the military compound, I filed an off-world transfer application, packed every belonging I owned, boarded a long-distance transport shuttle bound for T7-star, and disabled every traceable function on my galactic ID comms unit, severing all contact with every person I'd left behind on the home planet. For 4 full solar cycles, I buried myself deep in T7-star's Interstellar Biochemistry Research Institute, building a wall of endless lab trials, compound synthesis, and clinical testing between myself and every memory tied to Elias Voss. I intentionally avoided all mainstream galactic news feeds, set my comms media filters to block every mention of military leadership, the Voss family fleet, and any elite alpha social circles. My entire routine revolved around developing next-gen suppressants for pureblood alphas and rare omegas. Ironic, considering the core reason I'd fled the home planet was watching Elias suffer through unmanageable, susceptible cycles with no permanent biological relief from a beta like me. I'd poured thousands of lab hours into refining stabilizing serums, shipping bulk shipments back to the Imperial Military Medical Division every quarterly cycle, never attaching my personal name to the delivery manifests. A small, stupid, unacknowledged part of me hoped those formulas might somehow ease Elias's pain, even if I never intended to cross paths with him again. I told myself I was just fulfilling my professional duty as a top-tier biochemist, but late at night, alone in my sterile institute dorm, I couldn't lie to myself. Every vial I manufactured carried a quiet, lingering longing I refused to name out loud. The only person who knew my full backstory here was Marlo Reed, a sharp, unapologetic female alpha who became my closest lab partner within my first semester on T7. Marlo was the first soul in decades who didn't judge me for being a beta, didn't measure my worth by my ability to anchor an alpha's hormones or strengthen political bloodlines. She'd grown up with a beta mother, so she'd never bought into the galaxy's toxic tiered hierarchy propaganda, and she had zero patience for anyone who dismissed my research or my capabilities, just because I lacked scent glands. We'd wrapped up a 12-hour stretch of synthesizing hormone buffer agents one afternoon, slotched in the Institute's break lounge, scrolling celebrity and military gossip feeds on our shared tablet when Marlo froze mid-swipe, shoving the screen directly in front of my face without warning. Clara, you gotta see this. Supreme Fleet Commander Elias Voss's general election coverage blew up every channel last week. Dude dropped off the public radar for 3 months straight right before voting day, then marched back into the Senate chamber and swept the entire ballot count by a landslide. But get this, rumors are flying that the Voss family locked him into a formal engagement with Linnea Gray, a pureblood Omega heiress from the Gray Interstellar shipping conglomerate. My gaze fixed on the footage playing on the tablet screen, and every muscle in my body went rigid. The man standing center stage in formal fleet dress uniform barely resembled the soft, gentle boy I'd grown up with. The warmth had completely vanished from his features, his jawline sharper, his eyes cold and hollow, every inch of his posture radiating unyielding, unapproachable authority. He'd lost significant weight over the 4 years I'd been gone, his cheekbones prominent, his shoulders rigid under the decorated military fabric. Standing rigidly one step to his left was Linnea Gray, poised, elegant, every inch the perfect Omega political spouse the public and the Voss patriarch had spent years pushing him to marry. Marlo glanced over at my blank, empty expression, immediately picking up on the quiet devastation rolling off me despite my beta lack of pheromones. Wait a second, you've never reacted like this to any fleet news, you know him, don't you? I exhaled a slow, shaky breath, dropping my gaze down to the chipped edge of the metal table between us. No energy left to keep the decades-long secret locked away any longer. Elias and I were together, back before I transferred out here 4 years ago. Marlo's eyes blew wide, her alpha instinct flaring with protective frustration instantly. Why the hell didn't you tell me sooner? All those nights you stayed up crying over serum prototypes, all the times you shut down whenever I brought up the home planet's elite social scene, this whole time it's been about him? She pulled her chair close to mine, wrapping one arm around my shoulders in a steady, comforting hold. If he's engaged to that Omega now, he's not worth wasting another second of your brain space over. We've got groundbreaking inhibitor trials to run, a whole galaxy's medical supply lines relying on your work. He's just a chapter you closed on purpose. I nodded and forced a neutral, detached mask back over my emotions, convincing myself the faint ache in my chest was nothing more than residual nostalgia for childhood memories, not leftover love. After that conversation with Marlo, I doubled down on my self-imposed media blackout, deleting every news app from my comms and refusing to engage with any gossip about the Imperial elite. I buried myself deeper in my research, earned 3 Interstellar Biochemistry Innovation Awards in consecutive years, and built a professional reputation that made every top research facility across the Empire beg to recruit me full-time. I'd become one of the most sought-after serum developers in the sector, yet I still kept my personal profile intentionally low profile, avoiding red carpet events, press interviews, and public award ceremonies at all costs. Being invisible had always been my safest shield against judgment and heartbreak. For years to the day I arrived on T7 Star, the Institute's administrative director summoned Marlo and me into his office for an unplanned mandatory briefing. The Central Imperial Military Research Headquarters based back on the home planet had sent an official transfer request, demanding our 2 names specifically to return to the Core World's flagship lab complex. The T7 Institute's leadership fought hard to retain us, offering salary raises, unlimited lab funding, and private residential quarters, but Imperial military research orders carried legal priority. We had no choice but to comply with the relocation mandate. I packed my minimal belongings that night, staring at the rows of labeled serum vials lining my lab storage shelves, a bitter, heavy weight settling in my gut. I'd run from the home planet to escape Elias, and now galactic bureaucracy was forcing me straight back into the same orbit as him. Every worst-case scenario I'd imagined over 4 years suddenly loomed directly in front of me. I spent the transport shuttle ride back to the core world cycling through endless worst-case outcomes, him fully bonded to Linnea Gray, a house full of half-Omega children, a permanent family life that left no room for the beta girl he'd loved as a teenager. I told myself I'd keep my distance, stick strictly to lab work, avoid all military and elite social events, and never cross paths with the Supreme Commander under any circumstances. That fragile plan shattered less than 72 hours after I stepped off the shuttle. My first rest day back on the core planet rolled around, and I'd slept a grand total of 4 hours over the prior 48 hours finishing emergency military inhibitor batch testing. I'd collapsed onto the guest suite sofa in the Voss estate, housing assigned to all top-tier Imperial research staff working closely with Fleet Command, intending to catch up on sleep when my comms buzzed nonstop with frantic incoming calls from Marlowe. I answered groggily, still half asleep, my voice rough with exhaustion. Marlowe, what's going on? I'm barely conscious over here. Clara, you need to get to the main lab complex right this second. Elias's susceptible cycle hit early, and every high-grade suppressant stock we have on-site has zero effect on his hormone levels. His pure alpha genetics built a complete immunity to standard formulas years ago, and the pheromone detector in his private containment wing is spiking off the chart. Staff can't even step foot in the hallway without getting overwhelmed by his unregulated pheromones. The medical team ran all our backup stabilizer prototypes. None of them touched the intensity of his episode. The only person who's ever managed to calm him down during these cycles is you. Don't you remember the mandatory galactic mate contract you signed before you left the planet 4 years prior? You're legally designated his primary bonded partner. Lab protocol requires your presence to stabilize him. I sat straight up on the sofa, sleep vanishing entirely, a confused, defensive edge creeping into my tone. Why would my presence matter? We're just a temporary contractual match on paper. Nothing more can't you administer a higher dosage of experimental serum instead. Every viable serum variant failed trial after trial this morning. His hormone resistance is unprecedented. Clara, there's no chemical workaround strong enough to regulate his alpha instincts right now. Get down to A1 containment wing immediately, or the entire lab floor risks a catastrophic pheromone overload that'll send every staff member into acute hormonal shock. Marlowe cut the transmission without waiting for my reply, leaving me staring blankly at my comm screen, my mind racing to process the sudden crisis. I dragged myself out of the guest suite, my eyes burning from sleep deprivation, and made the 15-minute walk across the facility grounds to the secured isolation wing. The pheromone warning lights flashed bright red the second I rounded the hallway corner, the detector's digital readout climbing past the safety threshold into dangerous territory. I stepped through the airlocked buffer chamber that filtered stray pheromones before pushing open the door to a once private room, and the second I crossed the threshold, a hard, unyielding grip wrapped around my wrist, yanking me fully inside before I could process what was happening. Elias slammed the door shut behind us, the lock clicking into place, and his teeth sank straight into the hollow of my neck hard enough to break skin. One arm wrapped tight around my waist to pin me flush against his chest, his other hand fisting my hair to tilt my head and expose the unmarked beta flesh of my jugular. His lips dragged rough, hungry kisses down my jawline to my mouth, biting hard enough to split my lower lip open, the metallic tang of blood flooding both our mouths, as he clung to me like a man drowning clutching a single life raft. Shattered fragments of the pheromone detector littered the floor by the doorway. He'd smashed the machine apart in the throes of his unregulated susceptible episode minutes before I arrived. Clara, he breathed against my bruised lips, his voice raw, broken, stripped of every trace of the stoic Supreme Commander public persona, nothing left but the desperate boy I'd left behind 4 years prior. Just kiss me, please. The dim room was only lit by thin streaks of silver moonlight filtering through the reinforced observation window, and I could see the endless hunger and agony swirling in his dark eyes, a cocktail of 4 years of unprocessed grief, unrelenting susceptible cycle pain, and unshaken longing for me that I never fully allowed myself to anticipate. I lifted one hand to cup his cold, sharp cheek, my thumb brushing over the dark circles under his eyes from years of sleepless military shifts and unmanaged hormonal episodes. I can't mark you permanently, Elias. I don't have a scent gland to anchor your pheromones long term. I whispered the quiet truth I'd repeated to myself 1,000 times over my exile on T7 star. He nodded once, a sharp, desperate jerk of his head, his forehead pressing hard against mine. It hurts so bad without you. Every single cycle these past 4 years has been unbearable. I sighed, surrendering to the quiet, inevitable pull I never truly escaped, and leaned into his waiting mouth. The hours that followed blurred together in a haze of suppressed longing and 4 years of repressed heartache. When I woke the next morning, the room was empty, the sheets cold where Elias had laid beside me through the night. A covered breakfast tray sat neatly on the metal side table, and the front door security lock had re-engaged, trapping me inside the isolation wing once more. I ran a hand over the dozens of fresh bite marks scattered across my neck, shoulders, and collarbone, skin raw and tender, where his alpha fangs had broken through my beta flesh. I dragged myself to the small private bathroom to clean the minor wounds, ate the silent meal he'd left behind, and passed out again on the unmade bed, exhausted from lab overtime and the emotional weight of confronting Elias after half a decade apart. I slept so deeply, I didn't register when a team of estate staff arrived to transport me back to the main Voss mansion grounds, only stirring hours later when my comms flooded with hundreds of incoming messages from old university friends, elite social acquaintances, and even my adoptive family's 2 alpha brothers. Every single notification carried the same shocked, furious undertone. How could you vanish for 4 years without a single word, then secretly return to the core planet and enter a formal bonded contract with Elias Voss without telling any of us? I scrolled through the media feed linked in one of the messages, and my blood ran cold. Elias had released an official galactic press statement overnight, publicly announcing our 100% compatibility temporary mate contract to every news channel across the Empire. The entire galaxy now knew I was his legal bonded partner, and all the old judgment, gossip, and disdain toward a beta paired with the Empire's most powerful alpha resurfaced all at once. My adoptive parents sent a separate, encrypted transmission shortly after, their message dripping with condescension and thinly veiled greed. They'd assumed I'd somehow uncovered blackmail material or hidden Voss family wealth to force Elias into the contract. Their primary concern not my happiness, but the potential social status and financial kickbacks they could squeeze out of the Voss conglomerate through my bonded partnership. I set the comms face down on the marble nightstand in Elias's master bedroom, staring out the floor-to-ceiling glass wall overlooking the estate's sprawling botanical gardens, my mind tangled in conflicting emotions I couldn't untangle. For years of carefully built emotional distance had crumbled to dust in a single night. I couldn't parse Elias's true intentions. Was he acting out of vulnerable, susceptible psycho desperation, or had he spent every year I was gone plotting a way to pull me back into his orbit permanently? I had no way to tell, and he'd vanished without a single follow-up message after the prior night's intimacy, ignoring the promise he had made the day we signed the contract to sit down and discuss our cohabitation terms at length. I planned to reach out to old friends for a night out to decompress from the overwhelming chaos of returning home and confronting Elias, so I dressed in a simple dark casual outfit and headed for the mansion's front entryway, only to find the main security lock code had been altered, my access credentials revoked entirely. Frustration bubbled up inside me instantly, but I remembered the narrow crawl space under the garden perimeter fencing I'd used as a teenager to sneak into the estate during Elias's worst punishment days. I'd memorized every inch of that hidden passage decades ago, and it still remained unmonitored by the main security grid. I navigated the winding stone paths to the overgrown utility opening, knelt down, and wriggled through the mud and tangled vines, emerging on the public sidewalk outside the Voss estate grounds with my jacket smudged with dirt and dead foliage. I hailed a public transport shuttle to the downtown galactic nightclub district, ready to drink away the stress of the past 72 hours and let loose for the first time since returning to the core planet. Inside the thundering, bass-heavy nightclub, I pulled up my galactic contact list on my comms, scrolling until I landed on Elias's blocked profile. I tapped the unblock command, watching the system pop up a cold neutral notification. Contact unlocked. You may now initiate communications with Elias Voss. The screen felt like it burned under my fingertips, a heavy, awkward weight hanging over my chest just reading his name on the display. I downed glass after glass of fruit-infused synth wine through the night, my beta metabolism processing the alcohol slowly, leaving me pleasantly buzzed but never fully intoxicated. I danced for hours to drown out the endless looping thoughts about Elias, the contract, the 4 years I'd spent running, and the Omega Heiress Linnea Gray the Galaxy believed he'd intended to marry. By 3 a.m., the club's crowds thinned out, and I dragged myself back toward the Voss estate, dreading the inevitable confrontation waiting for me inside the mansion walls. I hesitated halfway down the private road, leading to the front gate, briefly considering booking a hotel room for the night to avoid facing Elias's cold silence, but I knew there was no permanent escape this time, not with a legally binding galactic mate contract tying us together for the full solar year. I circled back to the familiar garden crawl space once more, ducking down to wriggle through the narrow opening, mud streaking across my sleeves and cheeks. When I pushed myself upright on the mansion's garden lawn, a tall, rigid silhouette blocked my path entirely. Elias stood directly in front of me, full formal military uniform still on his frame, only his fleet commander's insignia cap removed, his broad frame illuminated by the bright garden floodlights strung overhead. His hands clenched tight at his sides, knuckles white with restrained anger, every muscle in his body coiled like a loaded weapon. I froze mid-motion, caught red-handed sneaking back into his property through the same hidden crawl space we'd shared as teenagers, a sheepish, awkward smile tugging at my lips out of pure nervous reflex. A long time no see? I offered weakly, fully aware the careless night out covered in the mixed pheromones of dozens of strangers had pushed his already fragile alpha self-control to its breaking point. He didn't utter a single word in response. In one fluid, violent motion, he stepped forward, slipped one arm under my knees and the other around my back, lifting me fully off the ground like a small child, and carried me toward the mansion's main staircase without pause, his grip unshakable, his silence far more terrifying than any shouted argument could ever be.